The rain hammered against the windows of the WeWork building in downtown Seattle, each droplet racing down the glass like tiny digital streams of code. Inside, on the fourth floor, 27-year-old Marcus Chen sat hunched over his dual monitor setup, the blue glow illuminating his tired eyes. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday in March, and he was the only developer still in the office. Marcus had been with Velocity Tech for 8 months now, a Series B startup that promised to revolutionize cloud infrastructure management. When he'd accepted the offer fresh out of a coding boot camp, he'd been thrilled. The salary was decent for a junior position, the tech stack was modern, and the mission felt important. But somewhere between his first day and now, things had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. He refreshed his email for the dozenth time that hour. Still nothing. No response to the security audit he'd sent 3 days ago. No acknowledgement of the bug report he'd filed last week. No invitation to tomorrow's deployment planning meeting that his calendar notification kept reminding him about, the one he'd apparently been removed from without explanation. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the empty office. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see the whiteboard still covered in architectural diagrams from this morning's meeting, a meeting he hadn't been invited to, a meeting where they'd apparently finalized the launch date for their flagship product, April 15th, 2 weeks away. His phone buzzed. A Slack message from Derek Hoffman, the senior engineering manager. Marcus, need you to push the auth middleware changes to staging by EOD. Thanks. No context, no please. Just a directive sent at nearly 10 p.m., assuming he was still working. Which, of course, he was. Marcus had noticed the pattern emerging about 3 months ago. It started subtly, being left off email chains, his suggestions in code reviews acknowledged with brief, noted responses, but never implemented, his questions and stand-ups answered quickly before the conversation moved on to more pressing matters. At first, he'd told himself it was normal. He was the junior developer. He needed to earn his seat at the table. But as weeks turned into months, the isolation became more pronounced. Priya Mehta, the other junior developer who'd started the same week as him, was now regularly invited to architecture discussions. Jason and Raphael, the mid-level devs, would grab lunch without asking if he wanted to come along. And Derek had stopped making eye contact with him altogether.
The breaking point had come 2 weeks ago, during a critical code review. Marcus had been assigned to refactor the authentication system, a complex piece of infrastructure that handled user sessions across their entire platform. While working on it, he'd discovered something concerning. The token refresh mechanism had a race condition that could cause sessions to persist even after logout. In high-traffic scenarios, this could lead to serious security vulnerabilities. He documented everything meticulously: screenshots, code snippets, reproduction steps, potential attack vectors. He'd even drafted a proposed fix with test coverage. Then he'd posted it in the engineering channel, tagged Derek and the CTO, Amanda Walsh, and waited. The response came from Derek 20 minutes later. "This is theoretical. We've tested the auth system extensively. Let's focus on shipping features, not chasing edge cases." Marcus had tried to push back, explaining that it wasn't theoretical. He'd replicated the issue in staging. But his follow-up message was met with silence. That evening, he'd been removed from the architecture channel. No explanation, no message. Just gone.
He'd approached Derek the next morning, catching him by the coffee machine. "Hey, Derek, about the auth issue I flagged yesterday?" Derek had barely looked up from his phone. "Marcus, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but you're still pretty junior. Focus on your assigned tickets. We've got senior people handling the critical path stuff." "But this is critical. If someone exploits this during launch..." "We've been building software for a decade," Derek had interrupted, his tone hardening. "You've been here 8 months. Trust the process." That was the moment Marcus realized. It didn't matter how good his code was, how thorough his analysis, or how legitimate his concerns. In their eyes, he would always be too junior to matter.
Now, 2 weeks later, sitting alone in the dark office, Marcus pulled up the deployment pipeline. He had root access to the staging and production servers, a remnant from his onboarding when the infrastructure team had been too busy to implement proper role-based permissions. He'd mentioned it to Derek twice, suggesting they should audit access controls. Both times, Derek had waved him off. "We'll get to it after launch." Marcus wasn't planning anything. He just wanted to check something. He SSH'd into the staging server and navigated to the authentication logs. His heart sank as he scrolled through the entries. There it was, the exact race condition he'd warned about, occurring 3 times in the past 24 hours in staging. Staging, which saw maybe 5% of production traffic. He ran the numbers in his head. If staging was seeing 3 incidents per day with minimal load, production could see dozens, potentially hundreds on launch day, when they'd be pushing marketing hard and expecting 10x normal traffic. Marcus drafted another email to Derek, CCing Amanda. He kept it short, professional, clinical. Subject: critical security issue in off system, requires immediate attention. Derek, Amanda. I've identified a confirmed security vulnerability in the authentication system that's actively occurring in staging. See attached logs. This is the same issue I flagged 2 weeks ago. The race condition in token refresh allows sessions to persist after logout. In production, under high load, this could result in unauthorized access to user accounts. I've prepared a branch fix/auth race condition that resolves the issue without impacting the launch timeline. Can we schedule 15 minutes to review this before the deployment? Attached: server logs, code analysis, proposed fix. Best, Marcus. He hit send at 10:23 p.m. and watched the email disappear into the void. The response came the next morning, not from Derek or Amanda, but from Kevin Park, the VP of Engineering, someone Marcus had only spoken to twice since joining. Marcus, Derek showed me your email. I appreciate you trying to help, but we need everyone focused on their assigned work right now. The launch is in 2 weeks, and we can't afford distractions. Please complete your current sprint tickets and leave the architecture decisions to the senior team. Thanks. Marcus read the email 3 times, each reading amplifying the knot in his stomach. Distractions. That's what they thought of security vulnerabilities? That's what they thought of him. He wanted to fight back, to escalate further, to make them understand. But he'd already learned that lesson. In the meritocracy of tech, some people's merit mattered more than others. So, Marcus did what he was told. He focused on his tickets. He pushed the auth middleware changes to staging. He showed up to stand-ups, gave brief updates, and kept his head down. But he also started documenting everything. Every email, every Slack message, every code review comment. He didn't know why. Maybe just to prove to himself that he wasn't crazy, that he had tried to do the right thing. The following Wednesday, April 3rd, Marcus arrived at the office to find Derek waiting by his desk. The morning sun cut harsh angles through the windows, and Derek's expression was unreadable. "Marcus, can we talk in the small conference room?" Marcus's pulse quickened. He saved his work and followed Derek into the cramped room at the end of the floor. Through the glass walls, he could see other developers starting their day, grabbing coffee, laughing at something on someone's screen. Normal office life, continuing as if nothing was wrong. Derek closed the door and sat down without inviting Marcus to do the same. "This isn't easy," Derek began, and Marcus already knew where this was going. "We've been evaluating the team structure, and we've decided to make some changes. We're going to have to let you go." The words hung in the air like a suspended Docker container. There, real, but somehow detached from the moment. "What?" Marcus heard himself say. "Why? I've hit all my metrics. My code reviews have been positive." "It's not about metrics," Derek interrupted, still not making eye contact. "It's about fit. You're talented, Marcus, but you're not quite meshing with the team's dynamics. We need people who can trust the process, follow the leadership's direction without questioning everything." "I was trying to help," Marcus said, his voice tighter than he intended. "The security issue is real, Derek. If you launch with that vulnerability—" "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Derek said, finally looking at him. "You're too fixated on being right instead of being part of the team. This is a business decision. It's effective immediately." "Immediately? Don't I get a notice period? 2 weeks?" Derek shook his head. "HR will email you the details. We'll pay you through the end of the month, but we need you to hand over your laptop and badge now. Standard procedure for technical roles." Standard procedure. The phrase companies used when they wanted to avoid saying, "We don't trust you." 20 minutes later, Marcus stood on the sidewalk outside the building, a cardboard box with his few personal items tucked under his arm. His laptop was gone. His badge was deactivated. His Slack showed a generic, "You are no longer a member of this workspace." Message. 8 months of work, dismissed in a 20-minute conversation. No farewell, no thank you. Just the cold efficiency of corporate separation. Marcus walked to the nearest coffee shop and sat by the window, watching the Seattle rain resume its assault on the city. His phone buzzed with the HR email, severance details, COBRA information, the clinical bureaucracy of being fired. But underneath the shock and anger, a small voice in his head noted something Derek and Kevin and Amanda had apparently forgotten in their rush to remove him. His root access to the production servers was tied to his personal SSH key, not his company badge. Revoking his physical access didn't revoke his system access. And in the chaos of preparing for launch, that little detail had slipped through the cracks. Marcus wasn't planning anything. He wasn't vindictive. He just noticed. And he remembered what he'd found in those logs. And he wondered, with a mixture of dread and grim curiosity, what would happen when April 15th arrived and they discovered the truth the hard way. The rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean as Marcus stared at his reflection in the coffee shop window and wondered what came next. The days after being fired blurred together in a disorienting haze. Marcus had never been unemployed before. He'd gone straight from his boot camp to Velocity Tech, propelled by desperation and the crushing weight of student loans. Now, sitting in his cramped Capitol Hill apartment, the silence felt suffocating. It was Friday morning, April 6th, 9 days until launch. Marcus had spent the first day after his termination in a fog, oscillating between anger and self-doubt. Had he really been that bad at his job? Was he actually the problem? But as the shock wore off, clarity emerged. He'd pulled up his performance reviews, his code contributions, his ticket completion rates. Everything was average to above average for a junior developer. The metrics didn't support Derek's narrative about fit. What had really gotten him fired was simple. He'd made them uncomfortable by being right. Now, sitting at his personal laptop with a cup of coffee going cold beside him, Marcus found himself doing something he knew he probably shouldn't. He opened his terminal and typed in the SSH command for Velocity's production server, using his personal key. SSH mdoth@velocitytech.com. He pressed enter, half expecting an access denied message. Instead, after a moment's pause, "Welcome to Velocity Production Server. Last login, WED April 4, 1834-12-2024. His access was still active. They'd forgotten to revoke it. Or more likely, in the chaos of launch preparation, it simply hadn't made it onto anyone's checklist. Marcus stared at the command prompt, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He had root access to a production system for a company that had just fired him. The power of that access was dizzying. He could do anything: delete databases, modify code, inject backdoors, leak data. 1,000 revenge fantasies flickered through his mind, each more destructive than the last. But Marcus wasn't that person. He'd never been that person. He navigated to the authentication logs and started reviewing. The race condition was still there, unfixed, quietly occurring 3 to 5 times a day in production, even with their current low traffic. He exported the logs, timestamped and complete, to his local machine. Not to use against them, just to have proof that he'd been right. Validation, in the absence of acknowledgement. Then he logged out and closed his laptop. The thing about being right when everyone else is wrong is that it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like loneliness with evidence. Meanwhile, 7 blocks away, in the Velocity Tech office, the engineering team was entering crunch mode. Priya Mehta was the first to arrive Monday morning, April 9th. She'd been pulling 12-hour days since Marcus left, absorbing some of his tickets along with her own workload. She liked Marcus. He'd been helpful when she started, patient in explaining things, never condescending. His sudden departure had been jarring, especially with no explanation beyond Derek's vague comment in stand-up about restructuring. She grabbed coffee and sat down at her desk, pulling up the deployment checklist for the 100th time. 6 days until launch. The pressure was immense. Amanda had made it clear that this launch would make or break their Series C funding round. Everything had to be perfect. Priya's Slack pinged. Derek. Morning team, final sprint begins today. No vacations, no sick days, no distractions until we ship. This is what we've been building toward. Let's make it count. The message felt more like a threat than motivation, but Priya understood the stakes. She opened her first ticket of the day, final testing of the authentication flow. As she ran through the test cases, something nagged at her. She remembered Marcus mentioning something about the auth system weeks ago, some issue with token refresh. She'd been in a different meeting when he'd brought it up, but she remembered Derek dismissing it quickly. What was it exactly? She pulled up the engineering Slack history and searched for Marcus's name. Most of his messages had been routine, code reviews, ticket updates, questions. But then she found it, the message from 3 weeks ago about the race condition in token refresh, complete with reproduction steps and code analysis. Priya read through it carefully. It was thorough, well-documented, and concerning. She checked the code in the current production branch. The issue Marcus had identified was still there, unfixed. She walked over to Jason Rodriguez, one of the mid-level developers, who was deep in code. Hey, Jason, did you see the auth issue Marcus flagged before he left? Jason looked up, confused. Marcus flagged something? When? A few weeks ago, in Slack, about token refresh and session persistence. Jason frowned. No idea. Derek would have mentioned it if it was important, right? Priya wasn't so sure, but she didn't push. She went back to her desk and messaged Derek directly. Derek, reviewing the auth system for final testing, found an old message from Marcus about a potential race condition in token refresh. Should I investigate this before launch? The response came 5 minutes later. Already evaluated. Non-issue. Focus on your test cases. Priya stared at the message. Already evaluated? But if it had been evaluated, why wasn't there any documentation? No ticket, no code review, no resolution notes? She pulled up the commit history for the auth module. Marcus's last commit was dated March 28th, 3 days before he was fired. It was a partial fix for something, but it had been reverted by Derek 2 days later with the comment, "Not approved for release." She had a bad feeling about this, but Derek had been explicit, and she was already drowning in her own work. With a reluctant mental note to revisit it if time permitted, Priya moved on to the next test case. Back in his apartment, Marcus was trying to move forward. He'd updated his resume, started applying to jobs, reached out to his network. The tech market was competitive, but he had real experience now, even if it had ended badly. Several recruiters had already reached out. Seattle's tech scene was hungry for developers. But he couldn't stop thinking about April 15th. He'd set a calendar reminder, not because he was planning anything, but because he needed to know. He needed to see what would happen when they launched with that vulnerability in place.
Vindication through observation. Wednesday, April 10th. 5 days until launch. Marcus received a LinkedIn message from Rafael Santos, another developer from Velocity. "Hey man, heard what happened. That was messed up. Derek didn't even give us a heads up before you were gone. Anyway, wanted to let you know there's no hard feelings on our end. You did good work. Hope you land somewhere better." It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Marcus replied with thanks and asked casually how the launch prep was going. "Honestly, stressful as hell," Raphael wrote back. "We're running into weird issues in staging, and Derek's got us all working crazy hours. Pretty sure we're going to find bugs in prod next week, but that's software, right? You ship and patch." Weird issues in staging. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He knew exactly what those weird issues were, even if Raphael didn't connect them to the auth system. "Is Priya doing okay?" Marcus asked. "I know she was juggling a lot even before I left." "She's solid. Actually, funny you mention it, she brought up something you'd flagged about authentication. Derek shut it down pretty quick, though." So Priya had noticed, and Derek had dismissed her too. The pattern was clear now. It wasn't about Marcus being junior. It was about Derek protecting his ego, unwilling to admit that he'd missed something, that someone beneath him had been right. He thanked Raphael and closed LinkedIn. His hands were shaking slightly. He could still warn them. He had Derek's email, Amanda's email. He could send one more message, lay out everything one final time, give them a chance to fix it before launch. But what would that accomplish? They'd already made it clear they didn't value his input. If anything, an email from a fired employee would probably be seen as sour grapes or even a threat. They'd probably forward it to their lawyers rather than their engineers.
No, Marcus decided. He'd done everything he could when he worked there. He'd documented the issue, proposed a fix, escalated through proper channels. They'd chosen to ignore him. They'd chosen to fire him for it. What happened next was on them. Friday, April 12th. 3 days until launch. The Velocity office was chaos. The hashtag engineering Slack channel was moving so fast, it was hard to follow conversations. Derek had implemented a code freeze on Thursday night. No new changes allowed without his direct approval. They were in stabilization mode, fixing only critical bugs and doing final integration testing. Amanda Walsh, the CTO, sent a company-wide email. Subject: Launch week. We've got this. Team, in 72 hours, we launch Velocity Cloud Manager to the world. This is the culmination of 18 months of hard work, late nights, and brilliant engineering. I'm proud of every single person on this team.
Our demo to investors is scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m., immediately following our public launch at 9 a.m. We're expecting significant traffic from our marketing push, so everyone needs to be on standby for support. Remember, we're not just launching software, we're launching our future. Let's make it count. Amanda. Priya read the email and felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. She'd been testing the authentication flow all week, and something still felt off. The session management worked fine in normal use cases, but under stress testing, she'd seen a few weird behaviors. Sessions that should have expired but didn't. Tokens that refreshed when they shouldn't have. She'd mentioned it to Jason, who told her it was probably just the stress testing tool being glitchy. She'd mentioned it to Derek, who told her to trust the metrics. Their monitoring showed everything within normal parameters. But Priya couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus had seen something real, and they'd all been too busy or too dismissive to listen. Sunday, April 14th. 1 day until launch. Marcus spent the day hiking in Discovery Park, trying to clear his head. The rain had finally broken, and Seattle was having one of those perfect spring days that reminded people why they tolerated 9 months of gray. His phone was off. He didn't want to think about Velocity or launches or Vindication. He wanted to enjoy the sun, the trees, the quiet. But as he sat on a bench overlooking Puget Sound, watching the ferries cross the water, he couldn't fully escape the awareness that tomorrow morning, everything he'd warned about would be put to the test.
He'd done nothing wrong. He'd tried to help, been ignored, and moved on. Their failure, if it happened, would be entirely their own making. So why did he feel guilty? Monday, April 15th, launch day. Marcus woke at 6:30 a.m. to his alarm. He made coffee, opened his laptop, and did something he knew was probably unwise. He SSH'd back into Velocity's production server. His access was still active. They still hadn't revoked it. He navigated to the monitoring logs and opened a tail command, watching the live server activity scroll past. The launch was scheduled for 9 a.m. Pacific, but the system was already warming up, handling early morning traffic from East Coast users who'd heard about the launch through their marketing channels.
Marcus told himself he was just curious, just observing. He had no intention of interfering. At 8:45 a.m., the Velocity team sent their first launch day Slack. 15 minutes to launch. Marcus could imagine the scene in their office. Everyone gathered around monitors, energy drinks and coffee flowing, Derek probably giving a pep talk. The culmination of their work, their late nights, their vision. And somewhere in that system, in a few hundred lines of code that controlled how user sessions were managed, sat the vulnerability he'd warned them about. A ticking time bomb, waiting for the right conditions to detonate. At 9 a.m. exactly, Velocity Cloud Manager went live. The traffic spike was immediate. Marcus watched the server logs light up as hundreds of new connections flooded in. The marketing push had worked. People were signing up, creating accounts, exploring features. For the first 30 minutes, everything looked stable. Marcus checked the authentication logs specifically. Token refreshes were happening normally. Session management was holding. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe Derek had been right to dismiss his concerns. Maybe... Then, at 9:34 a.m., he saw it. The first race condition occurrence in production, triggered by a user in New York who had logged in, logged out, and logged back in within seconds. Their session persisted after logout. They now had duplicate active sessions, one of which should have been terminated. One incident, not a crisis yet. Marcus watched. 9:41 a.m. Another occurrence, this time in Texas. 9:48 a.m. Three more clustered together in California. The traffic kept building. By 10 a.m., Velocity's marketing campaign was in full swing. Tech blogs were covering the launch, early adopters were signing up in waves, and the race condition incidents were accelerating. 10:15 a.m., 12 occurrences in 15 minutes. 10:30 a.m., 27 occurrences in 15 minutes. Marcus watched the logs with a growing sense of dread. This was exactly what he'd predicted. Under high load, the race condition that seemed insignificant in testing became a cascading problem in production. At 10:47 a.m., something worse happened. A user in Boston logged out and logged back in. Due to the race condition, their previous session persisted. But because of how the token refresh mechanism worked, the persisted session was now associated with the wrong user ID. It had somehow grabbed the identifier from a concurrent session belonging to someone else. For 3 minutes and 42 seconds, the Boston user had access to another user's account. They could see that person's data, their dashboard, their settings. Marcus's heart was pounding. This wasn't just a theoretical vulnerability anymore. This was a live security breach happening in real time, in a production system that was being demonstrated to investors. At 11:03 a.m., the Boston user posted in Velocity's new community forum. "Bug report. I can see someone else's account. Is this supposed to happen?" That post was the first domino. By 11:15 a.m., 3 more users had reported similar issues. The hashtag support channel in Velocity's public Discord was lighting up with confusion and alarm. Marcus could imagine the panic starting to set in at the office. This was happening during their launch day, during the morning of their investor demo.
At 11:23 a.m., the engineering team made a decision that Marcus watched happen in real time through the server logs. They tried to restart the authentication service to clear the sessions and reset the system. It was exactly the wrong move. The restart triggered a massive burst of token refresh requests as thousands of active users tried to re-authenticate simultaneously. The race condition, already stressed by high traffic, now had the perfect storm conditions. The authentication service crashed. At 11:27 a.m., every user of Velocity Cloud Manager was suddenly logged out. The login page was unreachable. The service was completely down. Marcus sat back in his chair, his coffee long since gone cold, and watched the system fail exactly the way he'd said it would, in exactly the place he'd said it would fail. He hadn't done anything. He'd just watched. And in his silence, the truth had spoken louder than any argument he could have made.
That was it. No, how are you, Dad? No, when are you coming home? Just confirmation that the money had arrived, that the sacrifice was being received, documented, filed away like a transaction. Jack told himself it was enough. It had to be enough. What else did he have to offer a 24-year-old son he'd barely seen grow up? He'd left when Danny was 4 years old. Not left, exactly. That made it sound like abandonment, like he'd walked away from responsibility. No, he'd left for Danny, for Maria, for the mortgage on their house in Spokane, for the private school Danny would need, for the medical bills that came when Maria's mother got sick. He'd left to provide, to be the man his father never was, to give his family everything except himself. The plan had been temporary, a year on the road, maybe 2. Long-haul trucking paid well if you didn't mind the hours, the isolation, the way your body started to ache in places you didn't know existed. Jack didn't mind. Or at least, he told himself he didn't. He'd come home for holidays, birthdays, important moments. He'd be there for the big things. But the road had a way of swallowing time. 1 year became 3. 3 became 7. Somewhere along the way, Danny's voice had changed on the phone, gone from a child's chirp to a teenager's uncertain rumble, and Jack had missed the transition entirely. Somewhere between Albuquerque and Atlanta, his son had learned to drive, graduated high school, fallen in love for the first time. Jack had sent checks. He'd called when he could, usually late at night from truck stops that all looked identical. He'd told himself he was building something, a foundation, a future, a life his son wouldn't have to struggle through the way he had.
The first hour after the crash was chaos. Marcus continued monitoring the server logs from his apartment, watching the engineering team's frantic attempts to restore service. They brought the authentication service back up at 11:43 a.m., but it crashed again within minutes under the load of thousands of users trying to reconnect simultaneously. The race condition, still unfixed, was now aggravated by the panic-driven traffic spike. Through the server logs, Marcus could see different engineers SSHing in. First Derek, then Jason, then someone he didn't recognize, probably a senior architect they'd called in for emergency support. They were running diagnostics, checking memory usage, examining database connections, looking at network bottlenecks. But they weren't looking at the authentication code itself. They were treating it as an infrastructure problem rather than a logic problem. At 12:15 p.m., Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification from TechCrunch. Velocity Tech's major launch stumbles. Cloud management platform down hours after public release. The tech press was already on it. Marcus opened the article. Velocity Tech, a Seattle-based startup that raised $15 million in Series B funding last year, launched its flagship cloud management platform this morning to significant fanfare. However, within hours of going live, the service experienced critical failures that left users unable to access the platform. The company has not yet issued a statement about the cause of the outage or when service will be restored.
The timing is particularly unfortunate. Sources indicate Velocity was scheduled to demonstrate the platform to potential Series C investors this afternoon. Marcus closed the article. He felt no satisfaction, only a heavy weight in his chest. This wasn't just about being right or wrong anymore. Real users were affected. Velocity's reputation was tanking in real time. People's jobs were on the line. And somewhere in that office, Derek was probably having the worst day of his career. At the Velocity office, the scene was exactly as chaotic as Marcus imagined. The open floor plan that usually hummed with productivity was now a pressure cooker of stress. Derek had commandeered the main conference room as a war room, with half a dozen engineers crowded around laptops, trying to diagnose the issue. Amanda paced outside, phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapidly to someone, probably the investors, trying to explain why their carefully planned demo was falling apart.
Priya sat at her desk, pulled up the authentication code for the 10th time that hour. She'd been the first to suggest they look at the auth logic, but Derek had been adamant. The auth code is solid. This is infrastructure. Focus on database performance. But Priya couldn't let it go. She kept thinking about Marcus's message from 3 weeks ago, the one Derek had dismissed. She pulled it up again on Slack, reading through his analysis of the race condition in token refresh. She compared it to the error logs from this morning's crash. The pattern matched perfectly. "Derek," she called out, walking toward the war room, "Derek, I really think we need to look at the token refresh logic. The error patterns match exactly what Marcus described." "Priya, not now," Derek snapped, without looking up from his screen. "We're debugging a production incident. I need solutions, not theories." "This isn't a theory," Priya insisted, her voice firmer now. "Marcus documented this exact issue 3 weeks ago. The race condition in—" "Derek was wrong," shouted Derek, finally looking up at her. The war room went silent. Everyone was staring. "He was wrong, Priya. We evaluated it. It's not the problem. Now please, let us work."
Priya stood there for a moment, the weight of the entire team's attention on her. She could back down, return to her desk, defer to seniority and experience. That would be the easy path. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened her personal email. "I'm sending you Marcus's analysis," she said, quietly but firmly. "Read it or don't, but if we don't fix the actual problem, we're just gonna crash again." She hit send and walked back to her desk, her heart pounding. She'd probably just ended her career at Velocity, but she couldn't stand by and watch them fail when she knew what the problem was. Derek stared at his phone, seeing the email notification from Priya. He wanted to delete it unread, to dismiss it the same way he dismissed Marcus's concerns weeks ago. His pride screamed at him not to look, not to admit that maybe he'd made a catastrophic mistake. But the service was still down. They'd tried 4 different fixes, and nothing had worked. The investor demo was supposed to start in 45 minutes, and they had nothing to show except error messages. With shaking hands, Derek opened the email. Marcus's analysis was there, forwarded by Priya with a simple note. "This is what we're seeing in production right now." Derek read through it slowly. The description of the race condition, the explanation of how it would manifest under high load, the specific error patterns it would generate, the proposed fix. Everything Marcus had written 3 weeks ago was happening right now, in production, exactly as he'd described. Derek felt sick. He'd dismissed this. He'd told Marcus to focus on his tickets. He'd removed him from channels. He'd fired him. And all along, Marcus had been right. "Jason," Derek called out hoarsely, "pull up the token refresh code. Check for race conditions in the session persistence logic." Jason looked confused. "I thought you said, just do it," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. 10 minutes later, Jason confirmed what Derek already knew. "There's definitely a race condition here. Under high concurrency, sessions can persist after logout, and—" he paused, his face going pale. Holy shit! They can also get misassigned to different user IDs. Derek, this is a massive security issue.
The room went silent again. Everyone understood the implication. They hadn't just launched with a bug. They'd launched with a security vulnerability that had allowed users to access each other's accounts. "How did we miss this?" someone asked. Derek couldn't speak. He knew the answer. They hadn't missed it. Marcus had found it. And Derek had been too proud, too defensive, too convinced of his own expertise to listen to a junior developer. Amanda appeared in the doorway. "Derek, I need to know what we're telling investors. What's the status?" Derek looked up at her, and in that moment, he made a choice. He could lie, deflect, blame infrastructure or bad timing or anything else. Or he could tell the truth. "We have a critical security vulnerability in the authentication system," he said. "It was identified 3 weeks ago by Marcus Chen. I dismissed it as non-critical. I was wrong." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Amanda's face was unreadable. "Do we have a fix?" "Marcus wrote one," Derek said quietly, "before we fired him. I reverted it because I didn't think we needed it." "Unrevert it," Amanda said immediately, "and someone get Marcus on the phone, now."
Marcus was making lunch when his phone rang with an unknown Seattle number. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of him. "Hello? Marcus, this is Amanda Walsh from Velocity." Her voice was strained but professional. "I'm calling because we're experiencing a critical incident with our authentication system, and we need your help." Marcus felt a surreal sense of detachment, as if you were watching this conversation happen to someone else. "You mean the race condition in token refresh that I reported 3 weeks ago?" There was a pause. "Yes, that one. Derek just confirmed it's causing our production failure. You had written a fix. We need to implement it immediately. Can you walk us through it?" "You fired me," Marcus said, his voice flat. "I know, and that was—" Amanda hesitated. "That was a mistake. Marcus, I'm not going to pretend this call isn't awkward for everyone, but we have users affected right now. Some of them experienced unauthorized access to other accounts. We need to fix this before it gets worse." Marcus closed his eyes. He could hang up right now. He could tell them to figure it out themselves. They'd made their choice when they dismissed him, and now they were living with the consequences. But then he thought about the users, the people who'd signed up that morning trusting Velocity with their data, the people who'd been given access to accounts that weren't theirs, through no fault of their own. This wasn't about Derek or Amanda or Vindication anymore. It was about doing the right thing. "The fix is in my branch," Marcus said. "It's called fix/off race condition. It's still in the repo. Derek reverted it from the release branch, but it should still be in Git history." He heard typing on the other end. "I see it," Amanda said. "Walk me through what it does." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus explained his fix, how it added proper mutex locks around the token refresh operations, how it implemented atomic session updates, how it validated user ID consistency before allowing session transfers. He answered their questions, clarified implementation details, and helped them understand the testing scenarios they'd need to run before deploying to production. He did it clearly, professionally, without resentment or ego. Just a developer helping fix a problem, because that's what developers do. At 2:47 p.m., Velocity's authentication service came back online with Marcus's fix deployed. The race condition was resolved. Sessions were stable. Security was restored. By 3:15 p.m., the platform was fully operational again, 4 hours and 48 minutes after the crash. "Thank you, Marcus," Amanda said when they finished. "I mean that sincerely. You saved us today. I tried to save you 3 weeks ago, but you're welcome." There was a long pause. "Would you be willing to come in tomorrow to discuss what happened? I'd like to understand how we got here."
Are you offering me my job back? I'm offering a conversation, Amanda said carefully.
about what went wrong and what might go right. Marcus thought about it. A week ago, he would have given anything to hear those words. Now, sitting in his apartment with his coffee and his self-respect intact, he wasn't sure. "I'll think about it," he said. "I need to process everything that happened today." "Fair enough. My direct email is in the company directory. Reach out if you want to talk." They ended the call. Marcus sat in silence for a long time, staring at his laptop, where the Velocity production logs were still scrolling past. He'd been right. They'd learned he was right in the most painful way possible, and now they knew his name wasn't just attached to the problem, it was attached to the solution. Sometimes vindication doesn't feel like winning. Sometimes it just feels like being heard.
The story of Velocity Tech's launch day disaster spread through Seattle's tech community like wildfire. By Tuesday morning, every developer in the city seemed to know about the startup that had crashed during its investor demo and had to call back a fired junior developer to fix their production system. The version that made it to Reddit's r/programming was particularly brutal. Company fires junior dev for not being a team player after he reports security vulnerability. Launches 2 weeks later. System crashes due to exact vulnerability he reported. They have to call him for help. The thread exploded with thousands of comments, upvotes, and awards. Developers shared their own stories of being dismissed, ignored, or fired for raising legitimate concerns. It became a rallying cry about the importance of psychological safety in engineering culture, about ego in tech leadership, about the cost of not listening to junior developers.
Marcus read through the thread Tuesday afternoon, feeling oddly disconnected from the story everyone was discussing. They'd gotten the basic facts right, but the emotion behind it, the complexity of what he'd felt and was still feeling, didn't translate into upvotes and comment chains. His phone had been buzzing non-stop since Monday evening. Recruiters, former colleagues, reporters from tech publications, even a producer from a tech podcast. Everyone wanted to hear his side of the story. Everyone wanted him to name names, to give interviews, to turn his experience into content. Marcus ignored most of them. This wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about revenge or exposure or 15 minutes of fame. It was about something quieter and more personal, figuring out what he wanted next. Wednesday morning, Marcus took the bus downtown to a coffee shop near Velocity's office. Amanda had sent a follow-up email the day before. "Marcus, I understand if you don't want to come into the office. Would you be willing to meet somewhere neutral? Coffee? My treat. I'd like to talk about Monday, but more importantly, I'd like to understand how we failed you. No pressure, but I hope you'll give me the chance.
Amanda." It was the "how we failed you" part that convinced him, not what went wrong or the incident, but an acknowledgement that this wasn't just a technical failure, it was a human one. Amanda arrived right on time, looking exhausted but composed. She ordered them both coffee and led Marcus to a quiet corner table. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, settling into her chair. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Marcus admitted, "but I wanted to hear what you had to say." Amanda nodded slowly. "I'll start with the obvious. We screwed up. Not just with the launch, though that was bad enough, but with how we treated you. You raised a legitimate security concern, followed proper channels, documented everything thoroughly, and we dismissed you. Then we fired you. There's no way to spin that as anything other than a failure of leadership." Marcus appreciated the directness. No corporate speak, no hedging, just the truth.
"I've spent the last 2 days doing a postmortem," Amanda continued. "Not just of the technical failure, but of the organizational failure. I interviewed everyone on the engineering team, reviewed all the communications, read through your documentation." She paused, looking directly at Marcus. "You did everything right. We did everything wrong." "Derek didn't trust me," Marcus said, "because I was junior, because I hadn't earned the right to question his decisions." "Derek is on administrative leave," Amanda said quietly. Not as punishment, but because he needs time to process what happened. He's a good engineer, Marcus, but he let his ego get in the way of good judgment. And I let it happen because I trusted his technical instincts without verifying them. Marcus felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing that Derek was on leave. He didn't want the man's career destroyed, but he also felt a sense of validation that the problem was being taken seriously. What about Priya? Marcus asked. She tried to flag the issue too.
Amanda smiled slightly. Priya is getting a promotion and a significant raise. She showed courage in standing up to Derek during the crisis, and she was right. That's the kind of engineer we need in leadership positions. She's good, Marcus agreed. She listened when others didn't. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. Outside, Seattle's morning rush hour flowed past, people heading to offices, to meetings, to their normal Wednesday routines, unaware of the quiet reckoning happening in the corner of a coffee shop. "So, where does this leave us?" Marcus asked. "You said you wanted to talk about what might go right. What does that mean?" Amanda set down her cup. "I'd like to offer you your job back, not as a junior developer, as a mid-level engineer with a focus on security and system architecture. Significant raise, equity increase, and a seat at the table for technical decisions. You'd report directly to me, not to Derek when he returns." It was a generous offer, more than generous. It was vindication in the form of a job title and compensation package.
But Marcus found himself hesitating. "I appreciate that," he said slowly. "I really do. But I need to ask, what's actually changed? You can promote me and give me more money, but does that fix the cultural problem that led to this situation in the first place?" Amanda leaned back, considering the question. "You're right to ask. Here's what I'm committing to change. First, we're implementing a formal process for security reviews that can't be overridden by individual managers. Second, we're establishing anonymous channels for engineers to raise concerns that bypass direct management. Third, we're doing mandatory training on inclusive engineering culture, specifically around valuing input from engineers at all levels." "That's a start," Marcus acknowledged. "But culture change is hard. It takes more than policies." "I know," Amanda said. "Which is why I'm also reshuffling the leadership team. We're bringing in a new VP of engineering with a track record of building healthy team dynamics. Derek will have a path back to the team, but in an individual contributor role, not management. And I'm committing to quarterly skip-level meetings with every engineer, so I hear directly from the people doing the work." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of corporate performance versus genuine commitment. He saw exhaustion, yes, but something that looked like real determination. "Can I be honest with you?" Marcus asked. "Please."
A week ago, I would have jumped at this offer. Getting my job back, getting vindication, getting to rub it in everyone's faces that I was right, that would have felt like justice. He paused. But now, I'm not sure that's what I want. Being right doesn't erase how it felt to be dismissed, to be made invisible, to be told I didn't matter. Amanda nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'm not going to pressure you, but I will say this. What you went through, what happened on Monday, that matters. Not just to our company, but to how we think about engineering culture more broadly. You have a chance to be part of changing that, if you want to be." "Or I could go somewhere else and start fresh," Marcus said. "I've had recruiters reach out. Good companies, good opportunities." "You absolutely could," Amanda agreed, "and I'd understand that choice completely. But those companies will have their own cultural issues, their own blind spots. At least here, you'd be walking into a situation where everyone knows exactly what went wrong and is committed to fixing it. You'd have real influence to shape how we build going forward." It was a compelling argument. Marcus had to admit that. "I need time to think about it," he said finally. "This is a big decision." "Take all the time you need," Amanda said. She pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. "My personal cell is on the back. Call me when you're ready, whether that's to accept, decline, or just to talk more." They finished their coffee and parted ways. Marcus walked toward the waterfront, needing to clear his head. The April sun was bright, reflecting off the sound in diamond patterns. He found a bench and sat, watching the ferries come and go. Over the next week, Marcus did something he hadn't had the luxury of doing before. He explored his options carefully, without desperation. He took calls with recruiters. He interviewed at 3 different companies: a large enterprise software company, a mid-stage startup building dev tools, and a small security-focused consultancy. Each had interesting opportunities. Each made compelling pitches. But Marcus also did his homework. He asked detailed questions about engineering culture. He requested to speak with junior developers at each company, not just hiring managers. He asked about how they handled disagreements, how they valued input from less senior team members, how they dealt with mistakes. What he learned was enlightening. Every company had issues. Some were more subtle than what he'd experienced at Velocity. Some were worse. The enterprise company had such rigid hierarchies that junior developers barely spoke in meetings. The dev tool startup had a brilliant founding team, but a reputation for burning out employees. The consultancy was small enough that one difficult manager could make the environment toxic.
There was no perfect company. There were only places trying, with varying degrees of success, to build healthy cultures. Marcus also spent time reflecting on what he'd learned from the whole experience. Not just about Velocity or Derek or the tech industry, but about himself. He'd learned that being right wasn't enough. You had to be right in ways people could hear. You had to build credibility and relationships and trust, not because merit alone should be insufficient, but because that's how human organizations actually work. He'd learned that documentation mattered enormously. The detailed records he'd kept of his warnings and analyses had been crucial in the postmortem. Evidence was powerful. He'd learned that speaking up had a cost, but so did staying silent. The trick was choosing which costs you were willing to pay. And he'd learned that vindication, when it finally came, felt more complicated than he'd imagined. Less like victory, more like a painful validation that you'd been right to see what others couldn't. 2 weeks after the launch disaster, Marcus made his decision.
He called Amanda from his apartment on a Friday evening, after a day spent coding on a personal project and thinking about what he actually wanted from his career. "Amanda, it's Marcus. Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course. Have you made a decision?" Marcus took a breath. "I have. I'm going to decline your offer to return to Velocity." There was a pause on the other end. "I understand. Can I ask what made you decide against it?" "A few things," Marcus said. "First, I don't think I can walk back into that office without feeling all the emotions from before. Even with changes, even with a promotion, I'd always be the guy who was fired and proved them wrong. That's not the identity I want there." "That's fair," Amanda said. "What else?" "I've realized I want to work somewhere where I'm building the culture from the start, not trying to fix one that broke me. I've accepted a position at a smaller startup, just 15 people, early stage. I'll be one of the first engineers, which means I'll have real influence over how we build not just the product, but the team culture, too."
"That sounds like a great opportunity," Amanda said, and she sounded genuinely happy for him. "What will you be working on?" "Developer security tools, actually. The whole experience with the auth vulnerability made me realize how common these issues are and how bad most teams are at catching them early. We're building static analysis tools with a focus on making security review accessible to junior developers." Amanda laughed softly. "That's perfect, Marcus. Really perfect." "There's one more thing," Marcus added. "I'd be willing to do some consulting work for Velocity. Help you build out that security review process you mentioned, train the team on common vulnerabilities, maybe audit your code base. Not as an employee, but as someone who can help you actually make those cultural changes stick."
I'd love that, Amanda said immediately. We'd compensate you well for it, and it would be valuable for the team to hear from you in a context where you're the expert teaching them, not the junior developer trying to be heard. They talked through the details. A 3-month consulting engagement, part-time, focused on security practices and inclusive engineering culture. Marcus would work with the team to implement better processes, but from a position of authority and expertise, rather than as someone trying to prove himself. It felt right. Not perfect, but right.
Marcus started his new job at Sentinel Security on May 1st. The office was small, a converted loft in Capitol Hill with exposed brick, and a ping-pong table that nobody actually used. His new team was a mix of experienced security engineers and fellow junior developers who'd faced similar challenges in their careers. His first day, the CTO, Sarah Chen, gathered everyone for introductions. "This is Marcus Chen," she told the team. "Some of you might have seen his story on Reddit a few weeks ago. He's joining us as our 3rd engineer, and he's going to lead our work on authentication security scanning." One of the other developers, Mike, grinned. "So you're that Marcus? Dude, your story was legendary. Every junior dev in Seattle is rooting for you." Marcus felt his face flush. It wasn't really about being legendary, it was just a situation that got out of hand. "It was about being right when nobody wanted to listen," Sarah corrected gently. "And that's exactly why we wanted you here. We're building tools to help developers catch these issues earlier before they become launch day disasters. Your experience is valuable." Over the next few weeks, Marcus settled into his new role. The work was challenging. Building static analysis tools required deep understanding of both security vulnerabilities and developer workflows. But it was also energizing in a way his previous work hadn't been. He was solving a real problem that he'd experienced firsthand, and he was doing it with a team that valued his input, regardless of his experience level. In June, Marcus went back to Velocity for his first consulting session. Walking into the building felt surreal, like visiting a place from a different life. Priya met him in the lobby, her face bright with a genuine smile. "Marcus, it's so good to see you. Congratulations on the promotion. I heard you're at Sentinel now?" "Thanks. Yeah, it's going well. How are things here?" "Different," Priya said as they headed to the elevator. "A lot has changed. Derek's back, but he's working on infrastructure projects, not managing anyone. Amanda hired a new VP who's really focused on team dynamics, and we've implemented a bunch of the changes Amanda promised, including the security review process you designed." The conference room was full when they arrived. The entire engineering team was there, including Derek, who gave Marcus a small nod but didn't make eye contact. Amanda stood at the head of the table. "Everyone, Marcus is here to help us level up our security practices. He's generously agreed to spend time over the next 3 months teaching us how to catch vulnerabilities earlier, implement better review processes, and build a culture where everyone feels comfortable raising concerns." She looked around the room. "I want everyone here to understand. What happened in April was a failure of leadership, not engineering. We missed something important because we didn't listen. That changes now."
Marcus spent the next 2 hours walking the team through common security vulnerabilities, with a focus on the auth issues that had caused their launch disaster. He was clear, thorough, and pedagogical, not lecturing, but teaching. At the end, Jason raised his hand. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I should have listened when you brought up the auth issue. I just deferred to Derek's judgment instead of thinking critically myself." "I appreciate that," Marcus said. "But honestly, the goal here isn't about who was wrong before. It's about building systems where these issues get caught earlier, where everyone's input is valued, where we fail safely instead of catastrophically." Derek spoke up for the first time. "I owe you more than an apology." His voice was quiet but steady. "I let my ego override my judgment. I dismissed your concerns because I felt threatened by a junior developer questioning my work. That was wrong, and it had real consequences. I'm sorry."
Marcus looked at Derek. Really looked at him. He saw someone who'd made a mistake and was genuinely trying to learn from it. That mattered. "Thank you for saying that," Marcus replied. "I think we all learned something from what happened. Let's focus on making sure we build better systems going forward." By August, the consulting engagement with Velocity was wrapping up. Marcus had helped them implement comprehensive security reviews, establish protocols for raising concerns, and trained the entire engineering team on common vulnerabilities. The culture felt different, more open, more collaborative, more willing to hear uncomfortable truths.
Amanda met with him for their final consulting session at the same coffee shop where they'd talked in April. "You've made a real difference here," she told him. "The team respects you, they've learned from you, and honestly, I think you've helped heal some of the damage from how we treated you before." "That wasn't really my goal," Marcus said, "but I'm glad it helped." "I know, which is probably why it worked," Amanda smiled. "So what's next for you? How's Sentinel going?" "Really well, actually. We just launched our first beta product, a static analysis tool specifically for authentication code. It can catch race conditions, session management issues, all the problems that caused your launch day disaster." "I'd like to buy it," Amanda said immediately. "For Velocity, we should be your first customer." Marcus laughed. "That would be fitting, full circle. More than that, it would be smart business. We don't want to go through April again."
They talked for another hour, not about business, but about careers and growth, and what it meant to fail publicly and keep going. Amanda shared her own stories of mistakes and lessons learned. Marcus talked about the confidence he'd found at Sentinel, the freedom of working somewhere that valued his expertise from day one. As they prepared to leave, Amanda had one last question. "Do you regret how it all happened? If you could go back, would you change anything?" Marcus thought about it. "I wish they'd listened when I first raised the issue. I wish I hadn't been fired. I wish the launch hadn't failed, but..." He paused, considering. "Everything that happened after made me who I am now. I'm more confident, more clear about what I want, more willing to stand up for what I believe is right. So no, I don't think I'd change it." "That's remarkably mature for someone who got screwed over as badly as you did." Marcus shrugged. "I was right, and eventually everyone knew it. That's a better outcome than a lot of people get." 6 months after the launch disaster, Marcus was a different person. Not dramatically, he was still the same thoughtful, detail-oriented developer he'd always been. But he carried himself differently. He spoke up in meetings without second-guessing himself. He trusted his instincts. He'd learned that being junior didn't mean being wrong, and that expertise wasn't just about years of experience. It was about seeing clearly and communicating well.
Sentinel was growing. Their authentication security tool was gaining traction, with Velocity as one of several early customers. Marcus had been promoted to senior engineer, leading a small team of developers working on the next generation of security scanning tools. He still kept his documentation from the Velocity incident, the emails, the Slack messages, the logs. Not as a trophy or a weapon, but as a reminder that speaking up mattered, that documenting your work mattered, that being right wasn't always enough, but it was still worth fighting for. And late at night, when he reviewed code or designed new features, he thought about all the junior developers out there who were seeing something important that nobody else could see yet. He hoped they would speak up. He hoped they would document their findings. He hoped they would find teams that valued their insights. Because sometimes the person with the least experience sees the most clearly. And sometimes the system has to fail before people will listen. But when they finally do listen, when vindication comes not through revenge, but through truth, it's worth all the silence that came before.
A year after the Velocity launch disaster, Marcus received a LinkedIn message from a developer he didn't know. "Hey Marcus, I just read about what happened to you last year.
I'm in a similar situation right now. I'm the junior dev on my team. I found a critical bug. Nobody's listening. I'm scared to push too hard because I need this job. Any advice?" Marcus stared at the message for a long time. He thought about what he would have wanted to hear a year ago when he was in that same position. He wrote back, "Document everything. Write down what you found, how you found it, why it matters. Send it through proper channels. If they don't listen, you'll at least have proof that you tried. And remember, being right doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it just feels like being alone with your evidence, but it's better than staying silent and watching everything fall apart."
Whatever happens, trust your instincts. You see something real, even if others can't see it yet. And if they still don't listen, start looking for a team that will. You've got this. He hit send and closed his laptop. Outside, Seattle was experiencing one of those perfect autumn evenings, the sky painted in purples and oranges, the air crisp and clear. Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed out for a walk. He'd been too junior to matter, they'd said, but he'd mattered enough to be right. And in the end, that was the only validation he'd needed. The rest was just noise.